So now it is recording, and then I'll just jump in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Bolinga Talks. You have two hosts here with you for this podcast. My name is Quatez Scott, and I am the intercultural specialist for the Bolinga Black Cultural Resources Center at Wright State University. And I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Ariana.
Hello, I'm Ariana. I am a student employee at the Bolinga Center. I'm a sophomore in the social work program, and I'm super excited to start this podcast and have many meaningful conversations that will just, flow out of us. So before we get started, I urge you to follow us on our Twitter and Instagram pages at Bolinga CRC underscore WSU.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. Again, Bolinga. What is it? At Bolinga CRC underscore WSU. And we also have a YouTube page as well. I forgot to mention that. But we do have a YouTube page that we recently started. So folks can also find the Bolinga Center on YouTube as well. So Ariana, can you talk to us about what does Bolinga Talks stand for, specifically the acronym TALCCS?
Yes. So Bolinga Talks stands for Teaching All Lessons Through Critical Conversations. So this is basically where we all just sit down and talk to each other, whether that be about deep conversations that some people might not want to hear, or if it's just things or learning about, you know, things that we should know. So yeah, that's the point of talks.
It's always funny, right? The things that people don't want to hear. Still want to provide a platform to talk about those things as well. But what sparked this podcast is that there is a library that's dedicated to the Bolinga Center, which sits right outside of the Culture and Identity Centers inside of Millett Hall. But the works honor the lives of, or in the readings of Virginia Hamilton and Arnold Adolph. Their scholarship spans, history, sociology, folklore, Black political thought, poetry, as well as children's literature as well. Because of their expansive work, we wanted to provide a dialogue or a platform to talk about not only their works, but being able to connect that to what we're currently seeing in our society as well. Not just for Black Americans, but also the Black diaspora, the African diaspora, those who are displaced all across our global society.
And so, with looking back at history, for our first episode, we wanted to honor the history of the Bolinga Black Culture Center and bring in a guest who was literally one of the foundation of the center.
The foundation, indeed. So, one of the founding members of the Bolinga Black Cultural Resources Center, who is here with us today, is Larry Crowe. Larry helped start the Bolinga Black Cultural Resources Center back in 1971 with a group of students. So I'm going to go ahead and let Larry introduce himself. I always feel like when we ask people to introduce themselves, it never really does justice because those folks typically come on and then they introduce themselves in other ways anyway. So Larry, I'm going to let you come in and then tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Cortez, and thank you, Adriana. Um, my name is Larry Franklin Crowe. About 5 years ago, I took on another name, an African name, Kweku, which I received through my association with the Dayton Africana Elders Council. So, I I was I grew up in Dayton, went to Weaver School, started at Roosevelt, finished at Fairview High School. Um, I didn't know how to go to college. Though I was college material, I was told I was not by the counselors at Fairview. Fairview is a white high school, basically, and I grew up on the black side of town, on the west side. And in Dayton View, I was told by a counselor I should not even think about going to school. And then accidentally, and it was by accident, I took the SAT test and didn't realize what it was. And the vice principal said, "You ought to consider college," you know. So I had to change course in high school, thinking about college, but still not knowing how to get in. I even heard something about the United Negro College Fund, but I didn't. I was embarrassed to try to take advantage of that then because I was surrounded by white people, and I didn't want to be seen as a Negro taking money. You know what I mean. it was like anyway, it's crazy. So anyway, I'm like working in a factory. I'm working at inland manufacturing in the division of General Motors on the west side. And I'm going to school. I started going to school part-time in 68. And I take more classes in 69. By 1970, I'm in school full-time. And at Wright State, I found 25 students during the day. I think I heard there were another 25 or so at night. So only about 50 Black students there altogether. Uh, the school was a commuter campus, basically, a huge parking lot and a quadrangle of buildings, Allen, Ullman, Fawcett, and Millett Hall. We were mostly in Millett Hall. We had some kind of a room with a lunch room with a jukebox, and the Black people would be in there playing bid whist, between classes and talking. But some of the brightest people I ever met in my life were in that group. William Gillespie, John Hampton, Judge Cannon, who would later become a judge. Um, just a lot of really bright, smart people. And we formed an organization under the direction of Selman T. White from Springfield, who went by the name of Tom White. Can you imagine a Black leader named Tom White? But he was from Springfield, and he was a serious brother. He was an older brother from the Navy. He was taking management courses, business courses, and he organized us. And our meetings were held off campus because there really was no place on campus to hold a meeting in those days. So we all lived in Dayton. Nobody lived on campus then because there was no place to live. And so we would meet in my basement, William Gillespie's basement, Priscilla Pennell's basement, uh, different sites like that. We would have a meeting, then we'd play cards and, dance or whatever. And that's what we would do. The group was called the Committee for the Advancement of Negro Education, or CANE. And we were trying to advocate for Black students who were insulted by some of the white professors on campus, in class in front of everyone, because usually you'd be the only one in class, and you take a lot of abuse, not, I didn't get a lot of personal abuse. I was ignored mainly, and I didn't feel like I did have some experience with white people in school, so I was a little more prepared than some students were. But we had other issues, and we were concerned about bringing younger people to the campus, and use the resources of Wright State, which seemed to be considerable for the benefit of the West Side. And we founded a program called the Right Start program. It's like an upward bound program where high school students would come out here for the summer, and we would take them through a process of not just acculturating them to college, but we would acculturate them to being a part of something larger, a Black community that they were responsible for. So the thing that we did that I'm really proud of, and we're still doing it, those of us who are still alive, we pushed the concept amongst Black professionals and amongst the young that who we are to each other is more important than who we are to anybody else. We have to know who we are to each other, and take care of one another. That's what we try to push. And that's what we were doing through Right Start. In 1970, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, and that created a shockwave all across the country. And at Wright State, they had a memorial service, and some of the white professors came and they shed tears. And when it was time for Tom White to speak, Tom White had on a pair of dark glasses. He's wearing a black turtleneck, black pants, and black shoes. And he got up and he said, "These are crocodile tears because you all don't do anything for us. You know things aren't right here, and you're not doing anything." He says, "You ought to put your money where your mouth is and do something." And he challenged white folks to do something, and he challenged the Black students to speak out about what their condition was. And he said, "All the Black students who have experienced some kind of personal racial discrimination on this campus, please stand up." And everybody in there stood up, and there was a gasp, like that. And so it was a defining moment that set some things into motion for the next year. So the next couple of years, we continued to organize ourselves. And by 1970, there was student unrest all over Ohio. That's when the shootings were at Kent State. The Vietnam protesters were shot by the National Guard. Black students were shot in Jackson State in Mississippi. There were some students shot at South Carolina State. And we were uh, thinking, and we had read in the paper, read in the Time magazine and Newsweek about Black students on campuses who fought for a Black Studies department or Black Cultural Center, and both. And we thought, well, we pay taxes like everybody else. We're out here at Wright State, and I think one of the questions on here was that was about identity-based spaces in higher education. Well, the Wright State was white state. It was white. It was about white identity, and my pet concern and aim was to use the resources of Wright State to form a Black Cultural Center, which would have books, a library of tapes, budget for lectures, to bring in people from the community and outside the community to talk to us, to bring in art, music, all those things. And I wanted to, at the University of Dayton, Black Action Through Unity, their Black student group, had put together what they called a Black Cultural Center. It was which consisted of a desk, a poster of Huey Newton, and a telephone, and a file cabinet. I said, I don't want that. Now I want us to have a real Black Cultural Center. And I read about how they were in other places, and I want to bring that to Wright State. So that's one of the things that I agitated about. There are other, we submitted a list in the spring of 70 of some 12 demands, and we just brainstormed them, we didn't even discuss them. But some of the demands were, some were right on time, like let's increase Black faculty and staff at Wright State. There was only one Black professor at Wright State when I started, Al Smith, who taught mathematics. He was it, the only African-American professor. There was a part-time Nigerian professor who was really instrumental in us organizing. That was Cyril Untakagu, Nigeria. He was a mathematician, and he was shrewd, one of the smartest people I've ever met. But Al was on our side. He wasn't against us. He was just kind of caught in the middle, between the university and us. And so we wanted more Black faculty and staff. We wanted more Black students, more opportunities for Black students to go to Wright State, utilize the Right Start program. We wanted Black Cultural Center. That was one of the ones. And one of the other demands was even somebody asked for a Black co-president. So, which I thought was stupid, but we put it on the list anyway. It was almost embarrassing to even go in there and say that. But I had been, at the time, I was not like really outspoken. I'm a bookworm, basically. I'm reading. And I was like, they considered me like cultural kind of core of what was going on. Not so much, I wasn't out there. We had like 3 or 4 leaders who were more outspoken than I. And when they left, one joined the Navy, and it was myself and Linda Gillespie, and Linda was really a powerful speaker, and she'd point her finger at people and get them straight and all that sort of thing. And that was me who could figure stuff out, but I wasn't like a big, but I was elected simply because I was a male. I said it then, and I'm telling you now, that's the only reason that I was elected ahead of Linda. Linda was my best friend at the time, and Linda would have been more forceful as a leader than me, but we worked together, so it all worked out, So we put our demands in, and lo and behold, we got most of what we wanted. We did not get a Black co-president, but we did get money for a Black Cultural Center, and the wing of Millett Hall, where Bolinga is now, like on the end, at the very end where the windows are, is where we had the original Bolinga Center. It ran the whole length of the building. We had 3 suites of furniture, and then we had all the Black books, the African American books, Caribbean books, and African studies books were in our library. They pulled them out of the main library, and they were there in our library, in the Bolinga Center. In those days, they had to install a special library terminal in there because they had a punch card system. Then Black students manned our library. And that meant that Black students got jobs in the library, when if they'd have gone to the main library, they probably wouldn't have been able to get a job, So
Hmm.
they had student jobs in the Bolinga Center. Okay, so we had student work study jobs in the Black Cultural Center. So about 10 Black students were working in the Black Cultural Center. So I mean, it was like if you can work on Black culture, developing that, and get paid for it, and go to school, that's a great deal. That's a pretty good deal, and that's what I did. I was in heaven. So I was able to do what I wanted to do. I was excited. We had a chance to hire Dr. Sion. She was not shoved down our throats. We interviewed various candidates and chose her. Now she was Yvonne Chappelle then. She was married to William D. Chappelle, who was dean of students at Antioch College, and she was living in Yellow Springs. She was working for Wilberforce. She was in charge of student life at Wilberforce before she came over to us. When she came over to us, she was a fountain of information because she had been to Africa. She spent like 2 or 3 years in the Congo. She knew she was at the first festival, Black Arts and Culture in Dakar, Senegal in 1966, where Langston Hughes, the Fifth Jubilee Singers, um, I don't know, Catherine Dunham's dancers, all of those great luminaries were there in 1966. She had a recording of it on Phillips Records. We used to play it over the speakers in the Bolinga Center. You know, they would hear the drums start up on there was a big pageant on Goree Island when Black people from all over the Black world, Brazil, the Caribbean, United States, took part in this grand pageant on the island of Goree. And Goree is the island that's the closest to the Western Hemisphere, right off the coast of Senegal. That's where they staged a lot of the slave boats and that sort of thing when they enslaved us to bring us across from Senegal. Anyway, because they had other slave castles along the coast too, but that was the closest place to us, and so that's why it was staged. So I learned about that. I went to conferences at the expense of Wright State. I went to the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. I went to the African Heritage Studies Association, the African Studies Association. You know, I wanted to go. If there was a conference, I went to the Institute of the Black World in Atlanta, where Vincent Harding and them were. I was, if there was someplace to go, uh, I would go. I heard Angela Davis's sister speak at Defiance College. I went to Oberlin College for a Black student organizational meeting. I was in, like I said, I was in heaven. A lot of we opened the Bolinga Center with um, the ambassador from Ghana, uh, Ebenezer Moses Deborah. We had James Ngugi, who's now known as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the greatest writer in East Africa. He was with us then. We had David Driscoll, who's the father of Black, uh, what do you call it, like Black art history. He had a slide presentation of all the great Black artists, Charles White, Jacob Lawrence, all of these great artists. We had exhibits from the local artists. Bing Davis exhibited. We had Joe Overstreet from San Francisco. We had Ed Hamilton. We had all these Black artists, Fred Neal and his father, Robert Neal. Just there was something going on all the time. If you look at the old brochures, it's just a dizzying array of celebrities and information. Um, and we were learning about all these people we didn't know anything about. Dr. Sion was around. She introduced me to Hoyt W. Fuller, the editor of Black World. She introduced me to a whole lot of people. And we were just, she was an expert in uh, the cultural expressions of the Black French people. I mean, people in the French Francophone sphere, the Black folks from Senegal, Martinique, Haiti, that sort of thing. She was an expert in their literature. And so we had a course called Negritude. And Negritude was is what they meant. It was blackness, basically. The blackness movement in amongst the Francophone countries. It was just so she left in 73 and we had to get a new director. And so we brought in one of our local heroes, Dr. Arthur Edward Thomas, who became a national figure as an advocate of student rights in the public schools. So he came in as director and he brought in, he had gone to Central State. He was from Philadelphia, gone to Central State and later became the president of Central State for about 15 years. But Art brought in all of his associates, Tony Brown or Tony Brown's Journal, just Dr. F.E.O. Ellis, who was the #1 Black physician at the time. It was one person after another that he knew. It was like what they have, what they call a convocation at the
Mhm.
HBCUs. We had somebody new every week. We had Dr. Chancellor Williams. We had Francis Cress Wilson. We had Haki Matabuti. Somebody new every week. And all the students were, he had organized a class around a convocation. You'd come and listen to, and you'd write a paper about it, and you got extra credit, and I mean, it was like wonderful. All the students were coming because they could get class credit, they could get credit for it, towards their degree, and they would learn something new that they didn't know anything about. Bob Johnson, who was the editor of Jet magazine, was here. I mean, there were just so many great people. Earl Graves, Black, Enterprise. They were just a steady stream of them coming in, and they were talking to the students, having lunch with the students, interacting with students. And around 1974, I had a joint appointment between the Bolinga Center and the television station. It didn't work out too well on the TV side. They really sabotaged stuff I was doing. It was pretty sad. But when I left Bolinga Center, I was sure that though it was in capable hands, I was sure that we needed to do something in the community to do the kind of stuff we were still, to continue the kind of work we started in Bolinga Center. So since that time, I've been working, not on a college campus, but in the community to do similar things. I lived in Chicago for 30 years. I was a member of the Institute of Positive Education in Chicago. We had an independent Black school. We published a magazine called Black Books Bulletin. Third World Press, that was our press. We had a speaker series called Nation Studies. People would come for that. I was a member of the Association of African Historians under Dr. Anderson Thompson. I was one of the founding members of the Kemetic Institute under Dr. Jacob Carruthers, who also, along with Maulana Koringa, founded the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, of which I'm the second vice president. Dr. Greg Carr is the first vice president, and Mario Beatty is the president. And I've enjoyed everything I've done. I was director of the African American Arts Alliance for about 9 years in Chicago. I was an alliance of all the Black performing arts groups, the African dance groups, the theater groups. I was a member of Black United Front. I was a member of Artists to Elect Harold Washington, mayor of the city of Chicago. I was involved in that. I was closely involved with the African American Police League to bring community policing to Chicago. There's a lot of things. So people in Chicago know me. Now they say, man, you're involved in everything. You weren't the leader of anything, but you were in everything. And I say, yeah. So now they want me to write the memoir of everything. There's a brother's been calling me for 3 days to find out where I am on writing this memoir of my days in Chicago. And I was in everything, pretty much. A lot of at least the things that were focused on us, defining ourselves, for ourselves, and being in charge of our own narrative. Those are the kind of things I was involved in. So I'm grateful for this life, and it started at Wright State.
Nice, awesome. So it's really cool that one, it's cool to have you here today, but it's also really cool too because you said that when you were on campus, roughly 50 students, not even 50%, 50 students in general were
In
Black
total.
identified. Yeah, in total were Black identified. So just this fall, the university is graduating 77 Black identified students. We just had 59 of them are undergraduate students, I believe. So we had the Kente Stole the Kente Stole celebration last night, which is pretty cool. So one of the questions that I know Ariana was interested in was about like some of the struggles or some of the differences between student activism and student activism. That I don't want to speak for you, Ariana, but do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, so one of the questions that I had was basically just like how did you kind of navigate, because you were saying when you first started that like you didn't always agree with everyone's ideas when you say you were sending in all of the demands and things like that.
Like a
So like
co-president.
how, right, yeah. But but like how did you all kind of put all of those differences aside and just still focus
Yeah,
on the end goal?
well, one of the things that happened was not only did somebody want a black co-president, which I thought was stupid, but I didn't say anything about it in the meeting. We just we put it on there and we let
Mm-hmm.
it ride, you know. Um, what we tried to do, I guess, organizationally, I'll say this, that in the beginning, when we organized ourselves, we kept everything in-house. You know, when we had a meeting in somebody's basement, it was like, you know, a closed ranks meeting. There were
Mm-hmm.
no white people in our meeting, you know, and some wanted to come. They always want to come to black meeting, find out what's going on. And, you know, for whatever reason, for good or bad or whatever. But in fact, some Negroes at our meeting that wanted to go tell white people what we were doing. But
Mm-hmm.
we found a way to close ranks to discuss our issues. And in fact, some people were not invited to our meeting because we knew that's what they were doing, you know. So we closed ranks around our own interests. And when it was interesting because at one point the university was fed up with us and they tried to cut off our student funding, but they found out we didn't have any student funding. We weren't registered as an official organization. We didn't have an address. They didn't even know who the leader was or anything. They didn't know what to do with us.
Mm-hmm.
We would show up, place in mass, you know, of 25, you know, and they didn't know who the leader, they didn't know who to bribe or who to, you know, they didn't really know what to do with us.
Mm-hmm.
Which was that's one. There was one meeting we had, a famous meeting where this brother who'd been in the Air Force found out we were going to meet with President Brage Golden, who I thought was our nemesis at the time, but in retrospect, he wasn't so bad. When I consider the things that we got from Brage Golden, he may have been on our side, and I just didn't know it. He had to play the role of being you have to come to me and ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what Barack Obama was trying to tell Black America when he was president. Ask for it. Organize yourselves and come to me and ask for it. Then I can do it for you. You know, I said, well, I have no choice. You know, these Negroes, I don't know what they're going to do if I don't give it to them. But if you don't ask, you talk about, I've got a president. Oh, I'm so, you know, he can't, there's no pressure on him to do anything for you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
People will talk about him after he's gone. Oh, he didn't do nothing for it. Well, you should ask him, you know. But you know, we had a meeting with Brage Golding, and a brother came in who was an Air Force veteran, and just as we were going to tell Brage Golding what we wanted, he said, "Hey, I want to know about the parking. I pay parking fees at Wright State and blah 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 blah, blah, you know." So he got Dr. Golden said, "Oh yes, let's discuss that." So he they got on a tangent talking about parking. That was not one of our specific concerns.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't in our meeting. He didn't know what we were talking about. That's his personal concern, his parking fees, you know. So afterwards, we pulled him aside, and this one little sister called him a big dummy. He said, "Big dummy, what you come in there for talking about parking?" He said, "Don't you know what we're trying to do?" You know. So he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." You know, but you know, you should have, if you're going to meet with someone, you have to anticipate what's going to happen at that meeting and set your
Right.
agenda based on what you think what their response is going to be and what your comeback is. When we
Mm-hmm.
started the Bolinga Center, I was asked by the president, well, some of the students say, why don't we have a German cultural center or an Irish cultural center? And I said, well, you got that. It's called Wright State University. It's all about white studies. That's all it's about. There's no black people being studied at Wright State or being
Mhm.
or being featured at Wright State. We don't read the literature of James Baldwin here. We only read white people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you know, so he said, "Well, you know, I had a point. I know I got him on that. He couldn't. He knew it.
Well, I
He
know this
truly knew
isn't something that we had on the list of questions, but I think what you just said is also important for students that are organizing now. So one question that Ariana, I'm going to give her full credit because she did pose this question, but being able to understand from your perspective, what are some of the differences between student activists, particularly during your day versus student activists that you see today?
Well, we had. I don't know if there's a difference. or not. I mean, I don't know. We did not have, first of all, we didn't have, Wright State was not a very social campus in terms of black organizations, no fraternities or sororities. They were just starting to emerge as we were going after our demands. And they were, and at the time, the Deltas, the Alphas were part of a citywide chapter based at UD. And they weren't really on campus as such, so much. Now I think they're entrenched. They have a campus chapter of all the major black sororities and fraternities. We didn't have that. Our sole organization was KABU, the Committee for the Advancement of Black Unity. That was basically it. And then that eventually kind of deteriorated, not deteriorated, but it melted into the staff of the Bolinga Center. Because most of us who are in that end up being a part of the staff of the Bolinga Center when we opened the Bolinga Center. And so I was a part of that. I really didn't have much of a function as chairman of the Black students. And even before, when we issued our demands, there was a faction of students that didn't think we should have just a chairman. They thought that we should have a group of ministers like the Black Panthers had. So I said, okay, who wants to be minister of education? Who wants to be minister of this? So we changed the whole thing. So I wasn't chairman anymore, but I was part of the ruling group. But I just accommodated. I didn't. I could have said no. We have to follow our rules and vote. But I said, okay, if y'all want to do that, and people by consensus seem to agree that's what they want to do. So that's what we did. Did it like that. But it didn't. Because at the end of the day, you are who you are anyway. And I was still Larry Kweku, no matter what I was. I was the chairman or what. I was going to say the same things and do the same things, and had had the respect of the same students that I had, and so I wasn't worried about being the chairman so much. We had in those days, ideologically, we had some people on campus who were Black Panthers. There was maybe one or two. We had later on, towards 73, we had people in the All African People's Revolutionary Party who were on campus. We had people who had come over from Sinclair Community College who were members of a Black Student Cultural Organization called BISCO. They were, but I knew them from Dayton, and they came out when we issued our demands and supported us. And so did Black Action Through Unity from UD. So we had, we tried to build like that solidarity and communication between all the different Black student groups in the city, and as well as those on campus. But as I said, Wright State was such a commuter campus, you didn't have a lot of organizations on campus with a stake, in those days. So it's different now because I know you've got like a whole lot of different factions of groups
Mm-hmm.
that are there. We didn't really have to contend with that.
Yeah. So for either the organization, since Wright State has so many like Black organizations now, and there's probably more that even like want to be started, what like piece of advice would you give them just moving forward within their efforts to do things for the Black community?
Well, our common interest, I guess, as Black people would be our concern for ourselves as a collective. It'd be identity, that we identify that we're Black no matter whether we're in a frat or whatever we're in.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of them recognize that in those days. And I'll say that's, you know, everybody recognized that we were part of something larger than just our little group, and people, um, try to look out for, the group in aggregate rather than just the alphas, looking out for the alphas and that sort of thing. Because, the frats and stuff are based on a kind of a European model where you get a lot of groups, you get a group together and um, all of this one group looks out for each other. And then, but like as Black people, we're all in the same boat, basically. I think I don't know if it's Jesse Jackson who said it, but when they brought us over here and enslaved us, they didn't bring alphas in one boat and deltas in another, and
Mhm.
Presbyterians and AMEs over here, and sanctified. We're all in the same situation when we go looking for a job, when we have to face the public education system or the police department. You know, they don't see alpha. They see, they see you. They look at me, you. They see black. You know, uh, I was talking to a cab driver in South Carolina just last week. I'm an interviewer with the history makers. This has been going on now for about 20 years. I'm in my 19th year. Well, my 20th year now because I've been doing it. I've interviewed over 2,000 people for the history makers archive. These are life story interviews. So these are like 4 or 5 hour interviews with, people. I interviewed James Clyburn last week in South Carolina. I interviewed Bishop Frederick James of the AME Church. He's 99 years old. And I interviewed him in Allen University in the William D. Chappelle Auditorium, named after the father of Dave Chappelle.
Hmm.
I mean, the grandfather of Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
MD Chappelle Auditorium. I ought to put those pictures online. I shot some pictures of it. But I interviewed a man who was 97 who was in the Montford Port Marines. That was the first black Marine unit. He was 97 years old and he greeted me in a Polynesian dialect that he learned in Guam. But, he was also one of the first 9 black people on the Savannah, Georgia police force. He had a lot of stories about that too. I mean, it's more than notion being the first Negro. I'm telling you, in those days, it was a challenge. So
Yeah.
he had a lot of great stories. But but everywhere I go, I mean, it's the same thing. People recognize, that we are in the same situation. And as I was telling the cab driver, I said, you may think you're different from other black folks, but they know who you are, you know, and we have enemies. It's not all white people, but we have enemies, and our enemies are our enemies because we're not white. We're black, and that's how they pitch it. And if you don't realize that, you can really be, you can get your feelings hurt a lot. I mean, if you know it's coming, you can kind of guard yourself or make allies with other black folks. And it's not like all black folks are the same. We got a lot of differences. There are people in my family I like better than others. Everybody, has that kind of situation. But, we have common interests that we can, unify around. And that's what we tried to do then. And I think that's what you're going to have to do now too, or you're probably doing it.
Well, and one of the things so I like all of that, love all of that. And one thing, I don't know if you specifically said it, but I just wrote that down as you were talking earlier. But you said who we are to each other is more important than who we are to anybody else. And I think that is really important. And it speaks to a lot of what you were talking about in terms of how you all not only organize, but how you built community as well. One of the things that we're trying to do with the podcast is also connect our listeners to really great, reads and important works. And we were talking about this before we started recording. And you said that you would save it for when we actually started to record this, but I'm excited to hear it. But can you share, one book? So this section is called Wright Reads. And
Yeah.
Wright Reads is essentially about critical books that you think that our guests believe that all listeners should read. I know it's difficult, but can you point out at least one book that you think all people should read? And you promised us your favorite passage or the most powerful passage that's ever been written in Black literature.
Yeah, I can. Well, the book that had the most influence on me when I was a student, I was 18, and I don't think I'd even started Wright State. I was in the Black bookstore founded by W.S. McIntosh. We have a McIntosh Park on Riverview. A lot of people don't know who W.S. McIntosh was, but he was the civil rights hammer for Dayton. He was a man that would put his life on the line. He put his body out there. He didn't take any bribes. He turned down money. He walked the streets, knocking on doors, organizing Black people. And he was able to change a lot of the practices in the city of Dayton. He integrated the city of Dayton. The city of Dayton one time had no black employees. So it was Mac that did it, as they call him, W.S. McIntosh. He looks like a hero if you see his picture. He just looks like, but he didn't say much, but he was a man. He was really a man. And the men and women that were with him, like Leela Francis and Reverend Walter Dunson and others, they were some powerful people. But I was in his bookstore, the House of Knowledge, in Westtown Shopping Center, and I found a book called Africa's Gift to America by J.A. Rogers, Joel Augustus Rogers. And Rogers had just passed away in 1966. He was one of those old time black historians. They would dig and pull out any information he could, whether it's out of the Bible, out of the Greek and Roman classics. I mean, he would travel the world. He was a Pullman porter at first from Jamaica, and he would pull stuff together, and he started writing for the black newspapers. And then the Pittsburgh Courier was the most popular black paper back during the 20s and 30s. He'd write for the Courier, and he traveled to Paris. He traveled to Germany. Any place where he saw a reference to what we were doing in history, he'd report on it. So Africa's Gift to America, the theme was, it was published during the Civil War centennial in 1861. He wanted us to know that we fought in the Civil War. And he wanted us to know that we made a tremendous contribution to America. America wouldn't be America if it wasn't for us. And we didn't do it out of patriotism. We just did it because that's what we do. We contribute things like any other group of people, but we have a particular flavor of things that we do, and we do them well, and everybody knows it from around the world. There are conferences about black people that are held in Europe and Asia and other places, and we don't even know anything about. A professor at the University of Illinois showed me a whole agenda for a conference on the American Negro that lasted for a month in Sardinia, Italy. They were studying everything from black dance to black poetry to you name it. A month of presentations, and we don't think we're worth discussing half the time, but we're important on the world stage, and as I said, we should be important to each other. That's where it really, where that's the friction point. But Africa's Gift to America by J.A. Rogers. Here's this is my probably fifth copy of this book. I wore the covers off the first one. I gave it to a friend of mine. I bought another one that was new. I wore that one out. This is the fifth one, there it is. But he opens up with us as a world people. And it's not, see, this isn't a deep academic book, but it gives you things that, one of the first things I saw in the book was this picture of the Sphinx before they blew their nose off of it. This was drawn by Baron Vivant Dinan, who accompanied Napoleon in the French expedition to Egypt in the 1790s. His friend Count Volney wrote a book called Ruins of Empires, about all the sites in Egypt to report to the Europeans what was in Egypt, was all about. But here you see this black face on the head of the Sphinx before the nose was blown off. I'd never seen that before. So I said, wow, So a lot of things I was introduced to. I didn't know we had fought in the Civil War until I got a hold of that book. This is 1960. It came out in 61. I didn't see it until 68 because we never talked about that in school. So when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I paced my parents' basement floor, and I was angry, but I was also in wonder about what I was seeing for the first time. And I knew I had to do follow-up research, and that set the tone for the rest of my life, basically. Now, the passage, and I wish I had the book in front of me. I don't have a book in front of me, and I was trying to find it online. It's a passage by Baby Suggs Holy in Beloved. Baby Suggs Holy is the grandmother of the protagonist in Beloved, the one that was played by Oprah Winfrey in the movie. And the Baby Suggs Holy was played by the great black actor. Now I'm blocking on her name, but she's one of the great black actors out here. She played the role, and
Let's say Viola Davis.
no, it was somebody much older. B. Richards. B. Richards is dead now, but she was the one who played the role, and she's had such a command of language. Um, I hadn't. I first heard about this passage from Dr. Eleanor Traylor. She was at a conference of the Midwest African American Theater Alliance, which I was one of the conveners of, and we were in this time we were in Chicago, and at the Hyatt in Chicago, and she said that her friend from college, Toni Morrison, had just written this book called Beloved, and she wanted to read a passage, and she read this passage. This is a sermon that Baby Suggs Holy, who is the preacher for the slave community, read to the assembled enslaved people out in a clearing in the woods. And she said, in essence, she said, love your hands, because out there, they don't love them. They will just soon cut them off, work them to death. Love your eyes, love the things you see, and love, because they would just as soon pluck them out, you know. In other words, you got to love yourself first. You got to love yourself. You got to love your own. Then you can love somebody else. You can't really love anybody else if you can't love yourself. That's a simple concept in sociology and in psychology. If you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. And it's a beautiful sermon. And ironically, of all the parts of the movie, it was the only one that wasn't in the movie. It's in the credits. She puts it in the credits as the movie is trailing off. You see this sermon by B. Richards, and you can find it online on YouTube. But it's really powerful. And I got a chance 35 years after I heard Eleanor Traylor talk about it to interview Eleanor Traylor for the History Makers. And I said, do you remember this passage? And she said, yes, it's the most powerful passage in Black literature. And at the time, the most powerful Black teacher in Black literature was Dr. Eleanor Traylor. So I got that right. When I heard it, I said, I've never heard anything as powerful as this, and I probably never will.
Well, Larry, thank you so much for spending the evening with Ariana and myself. And one, I really do love that quote in and of itself, even if it's paraphrased, because I think that being a person of color, and then particularly being Black, just in general, we live in a world that's largely taught us to not love ourselves and to see ourselves as being ugly, and to capitulate, assimilate everything that there is about not just Black bodies but Black culture as well. So that's a powerful word, which is loving ourselves. And also, I would add to that, to love oneself is to know oneself as well. So we definitely want to encourage each other to read up on our history, to know who we are. I love that book. I just wrote that down myself, Africa's Gift to America. I'm definitely going to be going out and then looking at that book as well. So for all of our listeners out there, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and then Instagram, as well as YouTube, as I stated. Specifically on Twitter and Instagram, you can follow us at Bolinga CRC _WSU. Again, that is at Bolinga CRC _WSU for more information about what's going on in the Bolinga Center, but to also know about other episodes that are coming up through the Bolinga Talks podcast.
And as this podcast is inspired partially by the work of Virginia Hamilton, I would like to sign off with saying an important quote from her. The meaning of the street in all ways and at all times is the need for sharing life with others and the search for community. End quote. So basically, we are never alone, and throughout our lives, we are to continue to learn about ourselves and each other. And as Larry stated, that it matters what we mean to each other. And through that, we can grow within ourselves. So thank you all for joining us on our first episode of Bolinga Talks, and we can't wait to talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you both.
Dun, dun, that's it.